As a guy who plays video games from time to time, I have specific types that I really enjoy. So, if you've been on my channel for a long time now, you would know that I really like Time Splitters, which is an FPS. But I don't just like FPS games, I like games like Jet Set Radio, Sonic, Klonoa. Basically, I'm a fan of most types of video games out there, but one type that you may not have known that I'd like would be more experimental, stranger kind of games. Enter Lumines, this cool little puzzle game made by Q Entertainment, and the man behind games like Rez. It's another one of the games made by Tetsuya Mizuguchi and his team that incorporates the idea of gameplay with music. However you play influences the music, a concept based around the idea of synesthesia, cross-sensational feelings, as described by Mizuguchi. Lumines is a lesser known but relatively adored game, and it even has a few sequels, and last year it even got a full-on remaster. The games were always well received enough, so this may have warranted the creation of those sequels, but I found a possible lesser known reason as to why Lumines may have had those sequels in the first place. Many would presume that good sales led to one little game blossoming into an entire franchise. What if I told you that Lumines was successful thanks to hackers using it in their efforts against the security of the PlayStation Portable? Get comfy, because we're about to dive back into old history. Let's go. Sony has always had problems with their user base, more specifically, game pirates, modders and hackers opening up their systems and bypassing the security of them. The PS1 is what comes to a lot of people's minds when we're talking about this, the many ways to burn games being what people think of when discussing this topic. It got so bad that some games on the PS1 had ways to actually prevent pirates from getting past certain sections of the game or playing it properly. With the PS2, things calmed down slightly than how rampant it was on the PS1, but the PSP would become the next target of these people. It was in 2004 and 2005 when the PSP would launch, and from the get-go, hackers would begin cracking the system open. One particular reason for this would be the fact that upon launch, the PSP was incredibly lackluster in a few ways. Lack of compatibility with certain video formats was one of the issues. So hackers took to resolving such issues. Starting with the exploits found in the first firmwares available for the system, users managed to get basic emulators and even Hello World running on it. Such activity bothered Sony, forcing them to release updates with added features like web browsing. Sony would try to entice hackers to stop their hacking attempts with additional system features and new updates, although most hackers would take to avoiding these updates to the PSP entirely, a situation described by many as a carrot and stick approach. As Sony released newer firmware to counter the attempts by hackers to break open the system's security, hackers just simply stopped updating their systems. With the problem of homebrew ever increasing on the PSP, Sony now had specific games contain firmware updates, which would force the user into updating so that the games could run properly. Those who had updated their systems but wished to return to the previous firmware would have to use downgraders, provided by the community, in order to play homebrew once more. The problem would intensify as the years went on. With every update Sony put out in both 2006-2007, hackers managed to find a solution. The most damaging attempts so far by modders and hackers to the security of Sony's PSP would be custom firmware. With custom firmware, it could be updated by its creators to offer similar benefits to the official one, bypassing the games that required forcefully updating to play them. So you may be wondering, what does any of this have to do with Lumines? What does this brief and summarised version of a long series of events have to do with a small puzzle game? Allow me to elaborate. Lumines was a launch title for the PSP in 2004 and 2005. Being released to critical acclaim, it was a fairly decent commercial success in all regions, the game moving 300,000 units in North America alone. Thanks to the success of Lumines, it spawned a few ports and a sequel. It was around June of 2007, specifically June the 23rd, 3 years after the release of the game, in which the game would receive newfound attention thanks to hackers discovering an exploit. Dubbed the Illuminati exploit, it allowed for unsigned code to run via a combination of a PSP memory stick and the actual Lumines UMD. while other exploits had raised a lot of attention to games that had previously released, like Grand Theft Auto's Liberty City Stories for example. This instance was the most damaging to Sony so far, and this simple puzzle game was the source of it all. A game that had released 3 years prior suddenly saw a massive spike in sales in the summer of 2007. An increase of 6,000 in sales of the game had happened solely on Amazon, due to the fact that Lumines was the only game with an exploit that was not only extremely effective against Sony's constant updates to the PSP, but copies of the game were extremely common already due to the original run selling so well. While Sony did attempt to stop the spread of the exploit and effectiveness of it by quickly releasing an update that patched the holes, the damage had been done. The update was optional and people could refuse to update their systems if they wanted, therefore the exploit remained strong and prominent. It was a permanent win for the hackers, who were able to use the exploit to downgrade their systems. While more advanced exploits have since come out, the Illuminati exploit was able to permanently damage the security of the PSP and, intentionally or not, amplify the popularity of the game known as Lumines. I find at this point in the history of Lumines and PSP hacking in general to be fascinating. It's not often that games get what is essentially a second chance. Both the PSP and Lumines gained a certain element of notoriety from what happened here, but the efforts of the hackers is what intrigues me the most. Hackers, essentially battling one of the largest companies out there, are looking for a way to cut through the security of the PSP, and they stumble across a small, well-loved puzzle game. It's funny to imagine that a game so simple turned out to be the perfect tool that hackers needed. But the thing that the hackers never expected is that their efforts to break open the PSP, and by using Lumines for it, they are perhaps a partial reason for the rest of the series existing to begin with. While Lumines was successful enough to get 4 small sequels/ports, the series received 6 more games after the spike in sales, all of which heavily expand on the original game's basis. Hackers are a very possible reason as to why Lumines ultimately got a remaster. They amplified the popularity of the game via the sudden sales in that summer of 2007, thanks to the Illuminati exploit. It's probably a strange thing to say, but when it comes to this instance, hacking in the homebrew scene actually did more to benefit than to harm. Piracy by many is seen as bad due to essentially taking away money from those who originally make the products that are being pirated. In gaming, it's seen more as a detriment than a benefit, but here, it actually may have helped Lumines become as popular as it ultimately is now. It's not something I would ever fully condone. But in cases like this, piracy and hacking can turn out to benefit. A battle between hackers and Sony, all in a bid to crack open the security of Sony's first portable system, and a small, simple but wonderful game caught up in all of it. There are many reasons for the success of Lumines. Many of those reasons are known, but it would not surprise me if some, like this, are forgotten. 15 years later, Lumines remains strong. The remnants of the efforts of those hackers still exists, even now.
The recording, copying, loan, unauthorized hire,
Public showing or broadcasting of this BBC Enterprises videogram is prohibited.